Hey guys, today's video is going to be looking at the assessment of fitness. So looking at the aims, the protocols, the methods and fitness tests. I'll do something a little bit different today. Instead of talking through every single fitness test, I'll sort of do more of a slideshow thing at the end, and anything that you need to look up, perhaps Google instead, because otherwise it's just going to look really boring. Because I won't have any diagrams or anything like that. Right, so let's make a start. So first of all, what's the point of even doing fitness testing? You can determine strengths and weaknesses. You can provide motivation and incentive. If someone knows they have somewhere or a deficiency in somewhere, then they know they need to improve and it motivates them. You can establish a baseline, so a point at which you really can't get any worse, and you improve from that point. You can monitor progress, so you keep doing regular fitness testing. You can evaluate the effectiveness of a training program, so if you do a pre and post test, you can see how well you've actually been able to train a particular fitness component. Some coaches also use it to determine team position, so whether you've got someone who sprints a little bit better or someone who can sort of work the whole field. And also just looking for talent, so sometimes they'll find that young athletes coming through will do fitness tests and sort of have extraordinary capabilities in particular areas, and then people like the VIS or the AIS will snap them up and say, well, you've performed really well on these particular fitness tests, we think you'd be suitable for this particular sport, come and train with us. Right, so the protocols of testing, there's particular ones. So this is basically the rules of testing. If you're going to have successful fitness testing, you have to follow these, because otherwise your test results won't be valid, basically. So the first one is reliability. And that just basically means that the test is able to provide consistent results each time. So you have to perform it under the same conditions. So say, for example, if you did the beep test in the gym, indoors, then you're not going to do it outside in the rain the next time. You do it with the same equipment, and also the athlete, if possible, should be in a similar state in the post-test than they should in the pre-test. So for example, they should have had the same sort of meals to eat leading up, same sort of hydration state, and they should be free from injury also, because that will definitely skew the results, and then it's not very reliable at all. The test should be relevant and it should be specific. So number one, you shouldn't be testing for something that has nothing to do with the sport that the athlete is performing. And also the test should be looking at individual movement patterns within that sport. So for example, a tennis player, you perhaps would want to test for, say, muscular power. If you're testing for something else that has nothing to do with tennis, obviously it's a waste of time. And also you'd want to be looking at things, say, like little short sprints and agility tests, that sort of thing, because on a tennis court the athlete is often ducking from side to side trying to reach for the points. Okay, validity is making sure that the test actually measures what it's supposed to measure. I mean, when you look at the beep test is supposed to measure your aerobic capacity, for example. Now, whoever created the beep test didn't set out to test any other fitness component, it was just aerobic capacity. And if you perform a fitness test, you should know exactly what it is testing, because again, it's a waste of time, or it will produce results that aren't valid. There are a particular type of fitness test called the gold standard, and that's generally the VO2 max tests, like on the treadmills and the bikes, and they basically have the most valid results that you can possibly achieve, because they are just so specific. All right, and then with your testing, you should have results that you can interpret easily, and you should be able to compare the results. So an athlete should be able to see their results and understand what the outcome is from that test, whether they've performed at a high or a medium or a low level, and they should also be able to see if they did a pre-test and a post-test, that they've done the same test, and then they compare if they've improved or they've gone backwards or they've just stayed the same. So it's quite important that an athlete is able to access the results in terms of interpreting and understanding. All right, so this is a really big one, informed consent. So generally when athletes are under the age of 18, they will have parents fill out informed consent, but if someone is over 18, they will fill out a form. It says basically that they understand what is going on in the test, and also what the test is aiming to do, what method will happen. So for example, if they're doing the VO2 max test, they have to understand that they'll have blood tests, they'll have tubes attached to them, they'll be working until their maximum, so they have to understand everything that's going on. It's also a very good idea to have a health questionnaire filled out as well to make sure that the person doing the test is of reasonable health. You certainly don't want them doing a high intensity test injured or with severe conditions like chronic asthma or things like that. And also the athlete needs to understand that there are safety measures in place. So for example, you've got someone who knows about first aid on hand if anything goes wrong. They also know the risks that are associated with doing the tests. So for example, again, the VO2 max test, there is an absolute risk of exhaustion because that's the whole point of the test. And they need to understand that that's the point they will reach and they really won't feel quite well afterwards. And also the confidentiality is a big one. The results aren't to be released to anyone else except the athlete and the people running the test, unless the athlete actually signs consent to do that. And sometimes that will be involved in the consent form. So it might say, I give my permission to release the results to other researchers or something like that. Right, so you've got some types of fitness tests. You have standardized fitness tests, so they follow a particular standard. You have lab tests and field tests. So lab tests are ones that are very reliable, very accurate. They're sort of like those gold standard ones that I mentioned earlier. But they're also very expensive. So they're ones that are done in the lab, and they're generally ones that require specialist equipment that's very expensive. And generally it's only one person at a time that can do it. And a classic example of this is the VO2 max test. You can't have more than one person doing it at a time. You can't have a team doing the test, for example. And you also need specialist equipment. The everyday person doesn't have access to the machines that monitor the levels of carbon dioxide being expelled and the amount of oxygen being inhaled and the lactate levels in the blood, that sort of thing. We don't have access to that, so it's very expensive to purchase. It's generally at institutions like the AIS, the VIS, or universities that run sporting programs. They will generally have this sort of equipment. And then you have field tests, which are much easier to perform, and that's generally what we do in schools because they're easier to access. They're very easy to administer. They cost very little because the equipment they use is either inexpensive or there's not a lot required, and anyone can basically run them. So long as you understand the testing protocol, you can run it. The problem is though that everyone has their own interpretation on the test, and it can produce varied results from time to time. And for someone like an elite athlete, this is not really going to cut the mustard. It has to be a lab test that they do if they want specific results. But when it comes to schools, a field test will be more than adequate. So then you need to look at whether your test is maximal or submaximal. There's not that many maximal tests around because they require someone to perform until exhaustion or as close as possible to exhaustion. And we don't sort of really like to make an athlete go to the point of exhaustion. It's not very pleasant. It's certainly not something we like to do in schools. And the problem is there that the intensity is increased over and over and over again. So again, the VO2 max test is an example of this, as is the Wingate anaerobic capacity test. But one that we do in schools is the 20-meter shuttle run test. Now, the difference between the 20-meter shuttle run and the VO2 max is that someone doing the VO2 max is going to be an elite athlete. Someone doing the 20-meter shuttle run will be a, a student in school, for example, that may not really care to push themselves to exhaustion. Whereas the elite athlete will want to know their results and they will push themselves. So in the 20-meter shuttle run, it's very easy just to drop out at, say, level 3.5 without trying very hard at all. And then it's not really a very good indicator in that case. Submaximal tests are those that are not performed to exhaustion. Your heart rate is measured when you get to a certain intensity, then that level of exercise has been achieved. So for example, to measure the VO2 max, for example, you'll look at the Queen's College step test or the Cooper's 12-minute run test, and you'll look for that particular heart rate, and then those measurements are used against a predictor of VO2 max. So it's not an absolute measurement of VO2 max, but you'll use relative measurements, so the heart rate measurements, to sort of stack up against what VO2 max would relate to the heart rate measurements. Okay, so just before I start the slideshow of the different variety of tests for each fitness component, I'll just do a quick sum up. So you've got aims of testing, which are the main ones are to determine strengths and weaknesses, provide motivation and incentive, to establish a baseline, and also monitor progress. And then you've got the rules or the protocols of testing, which is reliability, relevance and specificity, validity, interpretable and comparable results, and also informed consent. And then you look at the types of tests that you're going to run, whether it's lab or field. Most of the time we don't get a choice, and also maximal versus submaximal. So I hope you've gotten some information from that. So keep watching. There'll just be a little bit of music. It's probably really corny, but you'll definitely get a full list of the tests that I could access for each of the fitness components that will be examined in the end of your exam. Thanks for watching.